All right, let's jump right in. We're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 5 today. And look, I get it. You hear Genesis 5 and you're probably thinking, ugh, a long, boring family tree, right? A list of names. But what if I told you that hidden inside that ancient list is one of the most profound and frankly shocking messages you've ever heard? A secret code that lays out one of the most influential stories in the world.
So yeah, that's the big question we're tackling here. What if this isn't just some dry historical record of who was born and who died? What if it's a carefully designed puzzle, and all the clues have been hiding in plain sight for literally thousands of years? Stick with me, because this is wild.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the obvious pattern in the text. Then, we'll uncover this really powerful first layer of meaning. After that, we are going to crack the prophetic code hidden in the names themselves. And finally, we'll circle back to the one guy who broke the pattern and figure out what his life teaches us about a very, very modern problem.
Okay, so first things first. When you actually read Genesis 5, you can't help but notice this rhythm, this formula that just repeats over and over again. It really sets the stage.
It pretty much goes like this for everybody. Adam lived this long, had a son named Seth, lived some more years, and then he died. Seth lived this long, had a son named Enos, lived some more, and then he died. It's this monotonous drumbeat of life and then death. Life, death. It's hammering home the consequence of what happened back in the garden. But then, out of nowhere, the whole thing shatters.
All of a sudden, we hit Enoch, and the formula just completely changes. There's no, and then he died. Nope. Instead, it says he walked with God. And then, poof, he was just gone. It says God took him. This crazy break in the pattern is our first huge clue. It's like the text is screaming at us, hey, pay attention to this guy. He's different. And that difference is the key to everything.
Now, before we get to the really wild stuff, the hidden code, there's an incredibly powerful message just sitting right there on the surface. You see, this family tree isn't just a lift, it's basically the foundational document for the entire human race.
The text is crystal clear. Every single person on this planet goes back to the same two parents, Adam and Eve. And it makes a point to say that both man and woman were created in God's image. Think about what that means. The implication is just massive. If we are all literally one big family, then there is zero biblical basis for racism, for classism, or for sexism. None. We're all brothers and sisters. In a way, this whole chapter is the ultimate anti-division statement, boiling down the law to its core. Love God and love your neighbor.
Okay, here we go. This is the part you've been waiting for. This is where it gets absolutely fascinating. What if the names aren't just names? What if their original Hebrew meanings, when you string them together in order, actually tell a story?
Let's start building this sentence piece by piece. We start with the very first name, Adam. In Hebrew, Adam simply means man. Easy enough. That's our subject.
Next up is Adam's son Seth. The Bible actually tells us his name means substitute or appointed, because Eve saw him as a replacement for her son Abel. So our sentence is starting to form, man is appointed. Then we have Enos. In Hebrew, his name is tied to this idea of human weakness, frailty, mortality, the consequences of the fall. So a good translation is, cause of mortality. Our sentence now reads, man is appointed a substitute for the cause of mortality. You see where this is going?
Okay, let's keep going. Let's grab the next three names. We've got Canaan, which means acquires. Then there's Mahalalel, which means exalts God. And then Jared, which means descends. So the sentence keeps building. He acquires and exalts God, descending.
After Jared, we get to Enoch, our guy who walked with God. His name means teaches. And get this, his son, Methuselah, has a name that's straight up prophetic. It means his death will send. And here's the crazy part. The very year that Methuselah died was the year the great flood was sent. So our message now reads, descending and teaching, his death will send.
And we finish up with the last two. Lamech, which can be translated as the prominent, and finally, Noah, whose name, as we all know, means rest or relief. Okay, let's put the whole thing together.
Just look at that. Man is appointed a substitute for the cause of mortality. He acquires and exalts God, descending and teaching. His death will send the prominent rest. I mean, are you kidding me? That is a stunningly accurate summary of the entire Christian gospel message, hidden in a family tree written thousands of years before Jesus ever walked the earth. It's the story of a substitute for mortal man who descends, who teaches, and whose death brings ultimate rest. That is just incredible.
So now that we've seen this incredible prophecy, let's circle back to our original clue. Enoch, the man who didn't die, the man who just disappeared. His life actually gives us a really powerful and maybe even controversial lesson for today.
You know, our whole culture today is obsessed with finding yourself. Self-love, self-care, self-improvement. It's all about building my story. But Enoch's way? It was the total opposite. His goal wasn't to find himself. It was to get so lost in walking with God that he eventually just disappeared into him. His life wasn't about his story. It was about being a part of his story. And the text seems to suggest that our modern focus on self, well, it leads to confusion. But Enoch's path, that led to life.
And it's almost like the Apostle Paul saw this cultural shift coming. He warned about a time when people would become lovers of self and lovers of pleasure instead of lovers of God. I mean, that's a direct challenge to the self-obsession that our culture celebrates every single day.
So this brings us to the final crucial point from Genesis 5. The big lesson, the one that Enoch's life embodies, is a total paradox. To truly, actually live, you have to lose yourself first. John the Baptist knew this perfectly. This guy was a superstar in his day, huge crowds, tons of influence. But the second Jesus showed up, what did John say? He must become greater, I must become less. It's all about shrinking our own ego to make more room for God. And of course, Jesus himself taught this exact same paradox, this desperate scramble to build ourselves up, to cling to our own lives and our own little stories. Ultimately, that's how you lose it all. But true, lasting, meaningful life, that's found in surrender, in giving up your life for something so much bigger than yourself.
So, I'll just leave you with this question. This text, 5,000 years old, it challenges our most basic modern ideas about what success and a good life even are. It forces us to look at our own lives and ask a really tough question. Are you focused on building your story, or are you, like Enoch, trying to become a part of his story? The answer to that, well, it just might change everything.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on source material that, to a first-time reader, looks like the most tedious accounting record in history.
That might be putting it lightly.
Right. We're talking about Chapter 5 of Genesis, the foundational book. And you sent us this analysis of what is, essentially, a genealogy, a long list of names, ages, and who begat whom. It's the kind of list most people just skip.
I assume it's just filler, yeah. Historical record keeping.
But you know the drill here. We treat every line as a potential source of, well, unexpected knowledge. Our mission is to look at this genealogy not as a dry list, but as a coded historical roadmap. We're looking for the story behind the list. Okay, let's unpack this. What secrets are hidden in this ancestry?
Well, to start, and this is for anyone coming to this text cold, Genesis is the very first book. It covers creation, the first generations. But what's really crucial here is that some scholars see this chapter, Genesis 5, as the real starting gun for human history.
The real start. Why is that?
Because it establishes the proper line of descendants after Cain killed Abel. The document itself is labeled the Relat, which is just, the written account of Adam's line.
So it bypasses Cain, the murderer.
It completely bypasses him and starts with the third son, Seth. This is the first official written family tree, and it immediately sets the stage for what it means to be human.
And that's the blueprint, right? The one the sources really emphasize. That when the Creator made humans, he made them to be like himself. His living image. Exactly, his living image. Male and female, blessed and called collectively humans. That one statement is the foundation for, well, everything that follows.
It absolutely is. And the chapter then goes straight into the framework. Adam lived 930 years total. He was 130 when Seth was born. And the text is very careful to note that Seth was born in Adam's vivid image, or as his equal.
So it's a continuation of that original blueprint.
A direct continuation.
Let's just run through the chain quickly, because these names are the scaffolding for the whole hidden message we're about to get into.
Okay.
It's Adam to Seth, Seth to Enos, Enos Canaan, Canaan to Mahalalel, Mahalalel to Jared, Jared to Enoch.
Then Enoch to Methuselah, Methuselah to Lamech, and finally Lamech to Noah.
Right. 10 generations. A complete community leading right up to the Great Flood.
And if we just pause there for a second, the societal implication of that single shared ancestry is I mean, it's incredibly relevant today. What's fascinating here is that because this chapter establishes Adam and Eve as the common progenitors,
Every single human is basically a sibling.
every single one, and all are created equally in the image of the Creator.
So the immediate lesson, according to these sources, is a mandate for universal equality.
Exactly. The text says man and woman were created in God's image, so there should be no fundamental difference in value based on race, language, economic status, sex, anything.
This one chapter provides a basis to debunk every societal ism that's built on superiority.
It does. I mean, think about it. How does it counter something like classism or what the source calls machismo?
The excessive male domination,
Yeah.
yeah.
It counters them because that image means potential, the potential to create, to do good. And when you give that shared potential to every single person, you just strip away the foundation for discrimination.
None of us is inherently superior to anyone else.
We're all equals under the Creator's design. And this is why the sources point out that this account was later used by Christ, or Yeshua, when he was talking about God's original plan for the family.
Permanent marriage.
Permanent marriage between a man and a woman. The argument made here is that all the other innovations, polygamy, divorce, changes to marriage itself, they're all results of the hardness of heart that came from eating from the tree of knowledge.
From that mix of good and evil that brought confusion into human judgment.
Precisely. And it all boils down to one central idea: love God and love your neighbor as yourself. That idea of neighbor as sibling comes directly from this shared ancestry right here.
Okay, so we have this list of names that defines human identity and equality. But that's just setting the stage, isn't it?
It is.
The sources argue this genealogy is not just our history, but his history, the Creator's story, and that the names themselves were, well, a form of divine communication.
And this is where it gets really interesting. We have to treat this list like a cipher. If we look at the Hebrew etymological roots of these 10 names, Adam to Noah, and combine them.
In order.
In order, yes. They form a complete, coherent sentence, a message of redemption.
All right, let's start putting the pieces together.
So the first 3 names set up the problem. Number 1, Adam.
Means man. Simple enough.
Number 2, Seth.
The substitute.
The substitute for Abel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And number 3, Enos, which means cause of mortality.
Which the text says is due to sin inherited from Adam.
So that opening sequence reads, man, the substitute, causes mortality.
Okay, that establishes a predicament right away. So what's the response? What do the next names say?
The next section introduces salvation. We have Canaan, which means acquire or acquires. Then Mahalilel, meaning exalt him, as in exalt God.
Okay.
And then Jared, which means descend or falling.
So, it acquires to exalt God by descending. That sounds like a humbling, a coming down.
It is a coming down to reverse the curse.
Wait, hold on. The entire plan of redemption, this idea of a substitute figure humbling himself, is encoded in the family register of the first 6 ancestors.
That's the claim. An astonishing one, I know.
So how does the list finish the story?
It details the outcome and the timing. Number 7 is Enoch, which means educate or teach.
Uh-huh.
Number 8, Methuselah. This one is critical. It means his death shall send.
His death shall send what?
The sources note he was the longest-lived man in history, and they suggest God's patience was tied to his lifespan. He was holding back the flood, the diluvium, until Methuselah passed away.
Wow. Okay, and the last 2.
Lamech, which means prominent. And finally, Noah, which means repose or relief.
So now, if we stitch all 10 meanings together, what's the message?
The full phrase reads, man, the substitute for Adam, cause of mortality, acquires this cause to exalt God, descends to earth and teaches, his death shall send the prominent repose or, relief.
That is a unified narrative, buried in a list that most people would just dismiss as tedious.
It argues that the entire story of salvation was laid out structurally from the very beginning, a plan that transcends time.
It basically turns a historical record into a prophetic statement.
It does. It suggests an awareness of the future that the men naming their children just couldn't have had on their own.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly and focus on one of those names. Enoch.
The 7th descendant.
Right, number 7, which is always a significant number because of the 7-day creation, the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And Enoch's story is the great anomaly on this list. He had Methuselah at 65. After that, he walked in intimate communion with God for 300 more years. He lived 365 years.
And then comes the mystery.
One day he disappeared because God took him. He's the only one in the first 10 generations who seems to avoid the judgment of death.
And that simple disappearance holds an incredibly deep lesson, especially if you look at the original language. The Hebrew text is so stark. Enoch walked with God and was no longer there.
It was no longer there.
And if you connect this to how ancient Hebrew worked, the verb to be or to have is often just absent. They wouldn't say I am here, they'd say I hear. They wouldn't say I have, they'd say there is for me.
So what does that grammatical quirk imply about existence?
The implication is profound. It's that we, as humans, are not really the relevant part of the equation.
Yeah.
We don't possess anything. We're not defined by being. We're just pilgrims passing through.
Only the Creator is.
Only He is eternal and remains forever. It's an idea echoed later in texts like Romans, which says, for from Him and through Him and to Him are all things. We're completely dependent.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially when you contrast that ancient idea with the modern world. Today we have all this information, all this education, which ironically is what Enoch's name means, educate.
Right?
Yet our society is obsessed with the self.
Completely obsessed.
We're constantly chasing self-realization, self-esteem, finding our purpose, changing our identity. It's all about attracting attention to ourselves.
And it seems to lead to this perpetual dissatisfaction, doesn't it? The sources argue this self-obsession was actually prophesied for the last days.
That's the Apostle Paul reference.
Yes, in 2 Timothy. He said people will become lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, disobedient, lovers of pleasure rather than God.
It's striking. The core texts of this faith never tell you to love yourself or raise your self-esteem.
And yet that's the modern obsession. This endless search to find oneself just seems to push people further into confusion and misery.
So Enoch's path is the complete inverse of that. His name means education, but instead of educating himself or seeking himself, he sought God.
And by doing that, he automatically disappeared.
Disappeared from the earth, and more importantly, disappeared from self-focus.
The core message here is radical. It's not about us. It's entirely about him. The more we focus on ourselves to manufacture an identity, the more miserable we become.
It's a call to self-abandonment, not self-realization.
That's the ultimate teaching from this simple lineage. The wisdom from the sources is just unanimous on this. It's about losing the self to find true life. They quote that teaching. If you cling to your life, you will lose it, but if you give up your life for me, you will save it.
A clear mandate.
It is. If anyone wants to be my follower, he must abandon his selfish way of living, take up his cross, and follow me. John the Baptist captured it perfectly.
Right. He must become more important and I must decrease.
Exactly. And Paul summed it all up. He said everything else, all our accomplishments, our pursuits, is just rubbish compared to the value of knowing the Creator, of knowing Yeshua.
So the history of humanity isn't my story, it's his story. Capital H.
And Enoch is the example. Disappear from the world's focus. Lose your selfish aims to find him. If we connect this back to the bigger picture, this ancient text, this thing that looked like a boring list, has revealed two incredibly profound insights.
First, the coded message of redemption hidden in the names.
Proving the Creator's plan was there from the start. And second, a practical lesson on finding identity not through self-obsession, but through self-abandonment by following Enoch's path.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? We started by looking at the very beginning, where the problems began when humanity chose to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The moment they decided to determine right and wrong for themselves. We're left with a final provocative thought. The choice remains the same. Until when will we continue eating from that tree of knowledge?
Until when will we refuse to trust only in him and fail to eat from the tree of life, which is his instruction, his teachings, his way of walking?
Are we willing to be like Enoch and disappear? That's something to consider as you reflect on this deep dive.